Well, everyone, we won't drag this out any further because we are starting a few minutes late, and apologies for that. Thanks for joining us on a Tuesday evening, wherever you are. Really quickly, while we're on tonight's tasting, we don't have a ton of new things to fill you in on, but if you are in Calgary, October 28th, there will be a Cadenhead tasting put onto our website tomorrow. We have Jenna McIntosh from Cadenhead in town, so keep your eye open for that. Tonight's lineup, we've got 8 whiskeys, so we don't want to do too much of an intro, but you all know where to find info on our tastings. Also, our special guest, Richard Urquhart, who's kindly agreed to join us from Scotland, where it is now 2 a.m, wearing what almost looks like that sort of mustache thing that people used to wear in the 1800s, because the beard's gray, it's the chin's gray, Richard, and it's almost looking like that old-timey handlebar thing. You are muted, by the way.
Yeah, I might just shave that off, and that could be a good look, or not.
It could be a good look or a bad look, but it would be a look for sure. And I'm not one to point fingers about gray. The gray's coming in on my end for sure. So we've got 8 whiskeys. We're starting with the triple distilled, then on to the 10, 15, and 21 to round out the core range. We've also got 2002 Bourbon Cask for Kensington, the new one that just arrived. Our old 2003 cask, which I can't take any credit for. This is all James Bourne's squirreling away. He's a good dude. Then the 2007 SinDicate cask, which is bottled for one of our colleagues, Kurt, who's on the tasting tonight too. And then finishing off with the Benromach Polish Oak. Now, some of you may have already grabbed that. If you haven't, I have 6 bottles left. So if at the end of the tasting, you really want that whiskey, send me an email. And if I have more requests than bottles, I'll draw names. If I don't, you'll just get a bottle of it. But more info on that in a minute. You won't find it on our site. I think it's sold out, but we'll pull it up at the appropriate time. I'm a huge fan of Benromach. I love what they've done. Benromach's been a brand that I've been able to watch kind of, I guess, go through its rebirth throughout my career. When I started in 2003, there was old bottlings of Benromach, 18 and 21 years of age. And then we started seeing the Benromach Traditional and the peat smoke and the revival of distilling at the distillery under Gordon MacPhail, and watching it grow as a distillery again has been really cool, because it is, I think, one of the most interesting distilleries to watch in terms of the quality of spirit that's coming out of it. And we're not just saying that because we have Richard Urquhart, 4th generation of his family to own and be part of Gordon MacPhail and now Benromach, but because we truly believe this is one of the coolest distilleries out there right now. So we're thrilled to have Richard on with us tonight. Richard, anything you want to say before we dive into some malts here?
No, just obviously thank you, Andrew, and your team for always supporting our portfolio and our distillery, Benromach. And thanks, James, for helping us whiskeys here as well. And great to see everyone. Good to see some familiar faces there as well.
Indeed. So Benromach, why don't we start off? And Richard, if you want to tell people, because maybe not everybody on this chat tonight understands or appreciates why it's such an interesting distillery. Maybe we can dribble that out a little bit as we go, but always nice to get a whiskey in people's glasses, perhaps none more so than your own, since it's 2 a.m. there and you've just woken up from a bit of a short sleep. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the contrast range and the triple distilled?
Yeah, so just a quick little bit of background about Benromach. So we're a very traditional distillery. Everything we do there is made by hand. There's no computers there at all. It was originally founded in 1898. It opened and closed many times in its history until it closed in 1983. Then my family bought it 10 years later in 1993, and we spent 5 years re-equipping it, and we restarted production in 1998. So this is actually our 25th anniversary this year, or since we restarted production. So we make our core style, which we'll talk about in a little bit, which is based on how whiskey used to taste in Speyside if you go back in time. But being a small family-owned distillery, we do like doing experiments. So we do a contrast range, which is a contrast to our core portfolio. And these are either one-off releases that come in and never come back in, or the ones that we may do every few years, or in some cases, the ones that we do every year, like our organic and our heavily peated. The first one we have is obviously our triple distilled, which is a very light, elegant version of Benromach. So we have two stills at the distillery, which makes it more challenging to do a triple distilled because we don't have enough stills to do it 3 times in a row. So what we do with our triple distilled is we do a full run in our wash and spirit still, and then we don't take any spirit cut. We do that twice to get enough low wines that we can then distill the 2 batches together to then take our spirit cut, which is how we do our triple distillation. So we use our standard kind of peating level. We use the same kind of barley that we always use. It's always Scottish barley. It's lightly peated to 12 ppm, and then it's distilled 3 times, and that gives us a much lighter spirit than we normally get from our kind of double distillation. And that's why we put it into American Oak X Bourbon, because of that lighter influence. So if you look at the color of it, because my screen's quite hard to see, nice and light, nice kind of straw color. And that's just because that triple distillation gives us that lighter spirit. When it comes off the stills, usually it'd be about 70% after double distillation. It's almost 80% after we do that triple distillation. So it's a higher ABV at that point. We still reduce it to 63.5% to put it into cask. And it's still following our wood policy of always being first fill casks, but in this case, just first fill bourbon.
Yeah, it's incredible because I always assumed that this was unpeated, and if there was any trace of peat, it was just a residual amount of peat in the system from a prior distillation. But you're saying that you're actually using that same peated speck of malt for the triple distillation as well.
Yeah. But just because it's refined that extra time, that smokiness is just a little bit lighter.
Oh, it's so faint. I mean, now that I know it's there, but I guess maybe it's just, I assumed that it would be unpeated because, you know, most triple distilled whiskeys are. So curious for your thoughts. Kurt, I don't know if you want to chime in quickly, and then Harmony after that about your notes on this one.
This one's bottled at 46% ABV as well, which is standard now for our core range. Our contrast range. So everything we do in that contrast is now that 46%. If you tried any previous batches of triple distilled, it would have been 50% ABV, whereas now it's standardized at 46. But it's still non-chill filtered.
Kurt?
Yeah, it's pretty, man. This is going to be a night of me gushing, so I'll keep it really short. But I love the creaminess too, and I like that it's just really, really soft spirit and cask meeting, and the fruits are gorgeous on it.
And the smoke, I think you can get more on the palate than the nose, but I don't know if it's been the same the whole way through, Richard, but were there prior batches where there wasn't peat? Because I remember trying a batch like several years ago that was just, all it was tropical fruit. It was very faint, light tropical fruit. And I'm definitely getting the peat tonight, but I don't remember getting it on that prior batch.
Yeah, there still would have been peat in there. The only unpeated spirit we produce is the organic. Everything else is always at 12 ppm or heavily peated. Cool. We do have unpeated stuff that has never been released, but that will maybe for another event in the future. Who knows? That's
a conversation for another night. Harmony, do you have any thoughts on this one?
It's lovely, light, tropical. I love the vanilla and the banana. It's just a really pretty spirit, and the smoke, like you said, is really showing nice tonight.
Yeah. And James, we'd be remiss without letting you say a word or two as well. You're a whiskey geek at heart as well, so we'd love to hear your thoughts.
For sure. Yeah, no, the last time I actually tried this spirit, Richard, was with Richard in the little bar across the street from their under renovation shop. And yeah, I love how the smoke is a little bit more subtle here, and it kind of allows some of those secondary characteristics to kind of show their face a little bit more than you would get, say, in the 10-year-old, as we'll see shortly. Yeah. So yeah, it's just kind of a great alternate expression.
Evan, I think Evan's comments in the chat, Evan didn't want to hog the limelight because we've got a lot of people on here tonight who wouldn't mind saying a word or two about whiskeys, but I remember that first batch when it came in of triple distilled, which must have been about 4 or 5 years ago now. And I remember we tried it at one point, and I think we ended up buying all of it. And maybe it was the way it was distilled, but I don't even remember a touch of peat on it, but I would just remember it being so clean and so tropical and fruity. Like there was character there, but it was some of those characters that I love in an older whiskey, but in a younger age. And it's something that, I've not found very often before. But I think this triple distilled shows really well. And hopefully, that's something that you'll continue to do and release over time.
Yeah. So when anytime a member joins our business, you do a kind of a 2-year interview where you work in every department, in every part of the business. And my first kind of 6 months was spent working at Benromach. And the first week we did our first batch of triple distilled there. So that was my first kind of introduction into distilling, was working with Keith, our distillery manager, to do a triple distilled. And I always remember him asking, going, so how do we do that with only 2 stills? And then we went through that whole process of how we had to run both stills twice just to get enough liquid to distill that third time. So for me, the triple distilled one will always be something that I remember very vividly because of that first distillation experience for myself.
This it sort of leads to an interesting side question. I mean, obviously doing something like triple distilled in a small distillery like Benromach means you're sacrificing a bit of production, but are you producing enough of this where you might at some point see an older or an age statement version of the triple distilled? Like,
that would be a question my brother would have to answer, because he doesn't tell me everything that we've got in the warehouse. He's very particular about what he lets us all know about. But I know we've got some older contrasts potentially coming out in the future, but I'm not sure triple distilled is one of those ones. But I can ask him.
You never know. All right. Well, interesting. Cool. So that's the triple distilled. Why don't we move on to the 10-year-olds? And I'll just put that up on my screen, which, I mean, this has been the flagship malt for the brand now for, God, it must be more than a decade.
2009 it was released for the first time. And there was a bit of a change in kind of character from what we had done before. So I'm not sure if some of you ever tried what we called our Benromach Traditional, which was our first release in 2003, which is a young kind of 5-year-old whiskey. And that was matured mainly in ex-bourbon and a little bit of ex-sherry. And when it came to the 10-year-old, we kind of flipped the recipe to be a much more kind of sherry influence coming through. So it's this is very much like what we call the old school space side. A little bit of smoke, going back to the days when distilleries had their own full maltings. So even in space side, distilleries would have had a little bit of peat in their fires to dry their barley, and that kind of elegant and fruity style. So nice kind of maltiness on the nose, a little bit of zesty orange, and that kind of subtle peat smoke there as well. This is 2/3 for ex-sherry and 1/3 first fill ex-bourbon, but you still get quite a lot of that kind of American oak coming through there as well.
So Richard, when Benromach was relaunched, I know the intention was to do a more traditional style of space side single malt. And I mean, in a way, 1998, when the distillery started producing again, was almost before the boom and interest in single malts that happened in the early 2000s. So was that always part of the family's and the company's concept to produce something that would differentiate it from the rest of the players in the region?
I think it's our kind of family motto that goes back generations to always do things a little bit differently to everybody else. Hence why we are going with fill business. We always did single malts when everybody else did blend. When it came to Benromach, we had 5 years when we purchased the site to then get it back in production. And we looked back into our kind of liquid library to see what style whiskey was made decade by decade. And we kind of found something special and going back to that kind of older style. It's kind of the whiskey that my grandfather would have talked about, elegant, fruity, but that slight touch of smoke. Don't get me wrong, it's been a journey because trying to educate the market about how whiskey used to taste when everyone's now making space side whiskey that's unpeated did make it a little bit more challenging. But now we see with the awards that we're winning for our liquid that we really feel something very special about bringing back that older style. But let's see what everybody else thinks.
Yeah. Well, maybe I'll start with James this time. While he's unmuting himself, just have to say, like, there's something, and I know Tom Rand out in Cornwall commented on the nose or on the how much he loves this and at the price point, but this does have kind of an interesting sort of feel to it. This doesn't taste like modern whiskey, I think is probably the easiest way for me to say it. This is not a style that most companies are putting out there right now. James, what are your thoughts on the 10?
Yeah, just speaking from someone who goes and sells it, I think it's encouraging that like this is the type of whiskey that can kind of maybe help someone step beyond kind of some of those more, generic styles that they might have in front of them on a regular basis, and introduce them to some of like just a larger range of flavors in, a fair price. And it still has enough of those kind of friendly flavors that that you can get into it. And then there's just lots to discover. I feel like every time I come to it, I discover something new.
Yeah. For me, it's a lot like whiskeys like Springbank 15, where there seems to be there's big batch variation. And I think they've long since even tried to pretend that they're the same whiskey every time they do a bottling. As a company, and maybe Richard, this is a good question for you. Obviously, there's an intent to try to have a style and to try to be consistent with it. But is there a bit of an acceptance that even for something like your 10-year-old, that it's going to change a little bit from time to time?
So we adjust the ratio of sherry and bourbon cask to get as consistent as possible, but every cask is different. So it's my brother and his team will look after our kind of whiskey supply and our kind of cask selection. And they always keep back the previous 3 bottlings in terms of samples in the sample room. So you can always go back. Sorry, let me rephrase that. They always keep back enough stock to recreate the same recipe 3 times. So any change would be over a period of time, not batch by batch. And they're always trying to make sure we can keep it as consistent as possible. So if it's not consistent, let me know and I'll go back and complain to my brother that
but I think so. I guess where I'm coming from, Richard, and whether I'm probably not trying enough of them to know, but for me, the bigger thing is whether it's good. And maybe that's not who the 10-year-old's targeted at, but there's a lot of whiskeys like that I know my staff and I love trying when they come in, and I think even like Bunnahabhain 18 is a good example of this too. We know there's going to be subtle to significant changes from batch to batch, but we love trying them to see that little bit of evolution.
So when we first launched the 10-year-old in 2009, we were actually doing a kind of finishing, as in we were taking bourbon and sherry, bourbon maturation, bourbon casks, and put them into sherry hogsheads for a year, along with the kind of the liquid from sherry butts to try and add in that additional sherry influence. We then changed the recipe to fill a lot more into first fill sherry than we do first fill bourbon. So there will be a transition point of going from those casks which have been kind of married and left in first fill sherry for a year to a full maturation in sherry casks. But in theory, we should be able to keep that consistency coming through year after year. But I'll let you be the judge of that, Andrew. We can try a few more over the years, and you can let me know what you think.
Well, Richard, where I'm at a position of being a bit of a whiskey snob, not by choice, but just by opportunity. And, I have to admit, I probably don't try whiskeys like the Benromach 10 enough. And so when I come back and revisit them, you have an appreciation of how good they are. Evan, I'm going to let you chime in. Since Harmony's off video, you can share your thoughts on this one.
Yeah, this one, I think I got one of the first releases of it back in 2009 or probably 2010 by the time it hit Alberta, because I remember buying a bottle for my dad for Christmas and then taking it down to Preston and proceeding to drink half the bottle on him after that. But it's always hit me, and I said in the chat how I always get like almost like a slight licorice and even into a basil note or on this one in a fun manner. But it's just one of those great 10-year-olds for me that batch variation or not, like year in, year out, it's just a fantastic dram and a fantastic buy.
Cool. Thanks, Evan. Kurt, did you want to share anything on this?
My favorite 10 on the market. It's a dynamite whiskey. I would use this as my go-to for anybody that was kind of fence sitting with peated whiskey. So much going on, and I think this is really where you start to see the DNA of the distillery. It's like from here, it just like threads through everything. But this is kind of, I think, the best flagship on the market right now.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks, Kurt. Some high praise there, and I know Harmony commented in the chat, and lots of you've also put some notes in there too. Stewartson reminds him of some millstones, which is such an interesting compliment to pay, because I know we've talked about that in other tastings. Like Millstone is a company that I think by virtue of not being able to get the type of modern sherry casks most of the industry relied on, ended up buying to a certain extent something like what Gordon MacPhail has in terms of like old school sherry casks, actual maturation casks. So an interesting comment there in parallel. Why don't we move on to the 15? Let me put that up on the screen here. So Richard, tell us about the 15.
This is probably family favorite in terms of our go-to whiskies. We love the 10. We feel the 15 has just got that kind of more robustness, that kind of a heavier sherry influence, and it works really well with our spirit. So the color is a little bit darker, richer. There's more of that European oak kind of sherry cask influence. The smokiness is a little bit softer because that cask influence is actually started to add more flavor back in, so it hides some of that smoky, that phenolic taste. And we feel it's just a really nice, well-balanced whiskey. It's won every award that we enter into. We're very proud of all our whiskies, but we really feel the 15 has got a very kind of a special place in our portfolio. And it's probably one that we'll probably try and release more 15-year-olds as our distillery kind of gets older and older.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's definitely been a favorite bottling of mine. Now, Richard, this is question, and I don't know if it's something that we might see change at some point, but with respect to the core range and bottling at 43%, do you ever see the company tweaking that a little bit? I know you do a lot of other bottlings at 45 or 46 in cask strength.
So great question. We have discussed that over the years about where, particularly when we did the rebrand. So back in 2020, we changed our branding of the distillery back to a more traditional look. So before, I'm not sure if some of you ever saw that it was more of a script writing, whereas now it's much more of a block. Well, it's block writing on the bottle. So it is actually the old logo from the roof of our distillery from the 1960s. So when we did that rebrand, we discussed if it should have been moved to 46 or keep it at 43. And that is a challenge because it's award-winning liquid. Everything we enter into, it wins golds or higher in some cases in terms of double golds at San Francisco, and now platinum for winning so many double golds over the years. So we're kind of probably not going to change it because of that very reason, because the liquid is actually award-winning the way it is. And we can offer that higher ABV either through our cask strength release or through that kind of contrast release where we'll do at least 46%.
Yeah.
And we're also limited by stock as well. You got to remember we're a small distillery. When we first started production in 1998, we only started making about 130,000 liters of alcohol per year. And that's not enough even for our sales today. We're now kind of limited by what we made over 10 years ago. We're now making 500,000 liters of alcohol at the distillery per year, and that is the maximum we can make there. But to give you some context, that is a very small amount of spirit to produce. Some distilleries make over 20 million now. But for us, all we do is make spirit for single malt and for our own use. So that's still enough for us, but it does mean that it's never going to be a big distillery, because 500,000 liters, even in 10 years' time, wouldn't be enough for us to be a big whiskey brand, and that's what we're trying to be. So for us, it's about still retaining that kind of authentic, handmade kind of proposition. And yeah, but going back to your question, I think right now we'll probably keep it at 43.
Mm-hmm. Well, and just put that in perspective for people. Two of the biggest distilleries are almost producing in a week what you produce in a year. So that'll give you a little bit of a sense of scales there. And Richard, I guess one point that can be added to this, and this is sort of why I asked the question, is one of the things that I always found very interesting, both with Gordon MacPhail and Benromach, was the comment that even when you are bottling things at 43% and you're doing some degree of chill filtration, there's always this note that it's a very gentle or light chill filtration. It's not an aggressive one. And I think that's a point that's worth addressing, because, you know, a lot of people will get stuck on whether 40 or 43 or 46 is better in chill filtered or non-chill filtered. But you guys kind of have a different approach to it than a lot of other companies.
Yeah, so our chill filtration takes down to about 4 or 5 degrees. And it's not designed to change the flavor. It's just designed to keep it clear in the bottle. It also go cloudy potentially when you add ice and chill it below that temperature. So it's not about changing flavor, it's just about keeping that clarity in the bottle. But depending on where we're selling it, we do sell to about 35 countries around the world. Not everyone's going to know if a whiskey, understand if a whiskey goes cloudy in the glass. There's actually just this kind of the effect of non-chill filtration. So depending on what we're trying to achieve, will change if we chill filter it or not. As an example, Gordon MacPhail now, all the whiskies are pretty, well, apart from our Discovery range, are all non-chill filtered, all at least 46% and above. But yeah, so it depends on what we're trying to achieve if we want to chill filter it or not. But it is a light chill filtration. Some distilleries will chill below 0 degrees, and that is quite abrasive and will take out potentially a lot more of the phenolic, a lot more of the smokiness as well, and potentially impact the flavor, whereas we're not trying to do that.
Yeah. Thanks. James, do you want to chime in first on this one?
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of want to echo some of the thoughts about the chill filtration, the 43. Excuse me. Especially now that we have access to all these great single casks, and you know the contrast range has become more kind of in depth. I have to admit, I'd be sad if these went to 46. I feel like it kind of fills a gap. You know, I talk to a lot of people in the market that are kind of outside of the enthusiast bubble, and I think that we would actually lose a lot of those people. And I think it kind of serves a purpose. I don't think there's many 43% whiskeys that drink like this, that have this intensity and this character. And so I admit I would be sad if this went to 46%. So that's a change of heart I've had in the last year or so.
That's a good perspective. Okay. Kurt, you want to chime in?
Radio silence after that. I won't echo what James said. I'll take the 46, please. I want the texture on the oil. Yeah, there's I think I heard somebody say robustness there or something in the chat, and Evan chimed in about the weightiness of it too. Bigger spirits as they go up. The 43, I'm not sure is making much difference for me in terms of weight on palate or anything. It's kind of a no man's land to me, but I just don't even care. These are probably the 3 softest whiskeys, like the first core range offerings you guys have, that I don't even care about the ABV, because the flavors are just absolutely everything I'm hunting for.
Cool. Thanks, Kurt. Evan?
Yeah, this one is really hitting for me now. I've always been a fan of the 15 since it released, but it seems to be a little bit more robust than I recall it being in the past, even versus the 10, which I found often overpowered it when they were put side by side previously for me. The nose especially really jumps out. It's got that really nice earthy peak to it, going into a little bit of a cured meat or bacon note, but it's got this great sort of lengthy dryness that comes out on the finish as well.
Yeah, the 15's got a nice sort of old school vibe to it. It's nutty, that gentle bit of peat, some nice chocolate tones in there. I used to get this note that I would throw out in my tasting notes, to an extent where one customer, I remember, brought me a homemade version of it, but like I would call it like my Eat More candy bar note, where you get like the molasses and the nuts and almost a bit of a fruitiness coming through. And I remember Eric at one point brought me this like homemade version of an Eat More, which was kind of cool. I love this whiskey. I think it's got an interesting style to it. The sherry's got a nice balance. It works well with the peat level. You know, at some point, you know, I know in the chat someone there mentioned it would be nice to see the Benromach 10-year 100 proof come back. Maybe we could do a 15-year 100 proof at some point in time, just for fun.
Yeah, so I mean, with the 100 proof, it was quite interesting. When the first year we released it, So 57%, the Imperial 100 proof, not the kind of the US kind of strength. It did really well the first couple of years, but then the feedback was everyone wanted something slightly different each time rather than actually being consistent. So that's why we do the cask strength vintage now. Effectively the same proposition, except the strength will vary year after year. But a similar kind of age profile and similar strength, but it'll just be a little bit different. So we do it as that kind of cask strength vintage, and it does sell through every year now. We now do about 1 or 2 batches a year, and it sells through year after year. Whereas if Imperial proof, or we call it in the US, or 100 proof everywhere else, it just kind of started to slow down after that first kind of 2 or 3 years. And we've got no cask that can offer that, maybe potentially that 15-year-old. And we will get into some 50-year-old sherry casks in the future as well, which would be a similar style.
Well, maybe it's just, I think some whiskey nerds in Canada appreciate the 100 proof British meaning, which you sort of alluded to there. Like 100 British proof is very different from 100 proof in the States, which is just double the alcohol. But in the UK, it was proving your strength, which at one point in time meant that it was combustible if you mixed it with gunpowder.
Yeah, go back to old Navy days. 57% was proof that it hadn't been watered down, and it still did ignite with gunpowder at that point. So yeah, not that we have to do that test very often today. It's taken as granted that it's over 57% alcohol.
Yeah, very cool. All right, let's move on to the 21. So now, Richard, James put a question in the chat that I haven't brought up till this point yet, and it may be a leading question, but asking if we might see a 25-year-old Benromach in the future here. I don't know if this is a good segue into the 21 or not, because till now, this has been the oldest core expression in your range.
Yes, there's no plans to do a 25-year-old this year, because the portfolio strategy is aimed more around that kind of 10, 15, 21, kind of 30-year-old. But I'm sure there might be some single cask coming out, which will be more like 25 years old, potentially this year as well. But yeah, so no plan for a core 25-year-old anyway. It used to be a 25-year-old many years ago. That's from distillation before, or distillate from before we owned it in 1990. Well, and before we started making our own in 1998. But this is a bit different to the 15. So our cask makeup that we use is predominantly first fill sherry today. 2/3 of what we fill is first fill sherry, 1/3 is first fill bourbon. The bourbon casks are typically our balancing casks for our core range, and we'll adjust that ratio between sherry and bourbon to allow us to get that consistency that we're trying to get time and time again. The 15-year-old was quite a bit darker than the 21. That's because we use a lot of kind of first fill European oak sherry hogsheads, so there's 250-liter casks. So smaller cask, the faster the influence and the more influence we get earlier as well. Whereas as a contrast, the 21-year-old is using first fill American oak sherry butts. So it's the bigger cask, 500 liters. So it's still that ratio of 2/3 to 1/3, but being that American oak kind of sherry cask, we get more of that kind of toffee flavor profile coming through, rather than that kind of nutty and dried fruits you get in the 15. Smokiness is also softer as well, and that's for 2 reasons. One is that when we first started producing spirit at the distillery, our peating level took a few years to be defined. So the first couple of batches of 21 wouldn't have been 12 ppm, they'd have been a lower phenol content. And also just that 21 years, that cask influence is going to start to kind of take over and hide some of that kind of phenol taste as well. So that's why it's a bit lighter there. But on the nose, for me, it's just much more that kind of bit more toffee rather than that kind of dried fruits, and that kind of very soft smokiness is still there.
It, in a way, it does sort of segue back to, and I remember when your uncle Michael was coming to town and talking about Benromach, and he would say like the 2 sort of signature notes that they tried to preserve between the original distillate pre-Gordon MacPhail and the Gordon MacPhail distillate was like chocolate and orange, I think, were the 2 notes that, that sort of tied them together. And I think there's a bit of truth to that. Like you see a little bit, there's quite a nice chocolatiness to this whiskey, nice citrus tones coming in there too. And that one major difference being the peat. But after 21 years, the peat has softened a lot. It's incredibly soft at this point.
Yeah, so just to build on that point, when we bought a distillery, all we bought was a water source, buildings, and a name, and a few broken kind of washbacks, our kind of fermentation vessels. So we had to put new stills in, we had to put in all new equipment, and we were able to take some of these old washbacks and made them into kind of 4 smaller kind of washbacks from that original wood that we could salvage from the because there used to be a much bigger distillery than it is now. And so to get any kind of link between the old spirit and today is very much down to the water, the location, because everything else has been changed effectively from that time.
That's a fascinating thought. Evan, why don't I let you go first this time?
Yeah, this one is it's got a lot more sort of mustiness, as Stuart says, and dunnage notes for me. Goes into almost like some mushroom and miso notes because of it too, in a cool manner, but it's got this soft sort of tropical fruit note that's coming in underneath that in a cool manner as well.
Really nice spicy sort of sherry notes creeping in there. Kurt, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, you can see the age with that little bit of dunnage kind of thing Evan said is going on. I find the 15's a little bit more savory and umami to me than this one is, but I get where you're going with those kind of savory tones there that Chris mentioned. I prefer the nose on this one. I'm not sure I prefer the palate on this one. There's a little bit of a heavy sherry back end to it. I think I lean more towards the ex-bourbon.
Cool. James?
Yeah, I guess I just love how it's been crafted to be kind of different than the 15. Like there, it's, you know, it's not just like a clear progression of being an older version of the same whiskey. Like it just clearly expresses itself with a different range of flavors, which is great.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
We might see the profile change over time because it's some of the earlier stock. We are going to get into stock that is going to be a bit more European oak sherry cask influence coming through, but that will take a couple more years to see that kind of evolve into its kind of final version of itself.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think, Richard, would be the age where you'd start to expect to see that?
I'll probably get another 5 or 6 years.
Okay.
Hmm.
So I was going to say the batch that's in market now is from basically exactly a year ago. It's from September 2022.
So we don't have a time machine, so we have to use what we have. Today we can only change the future of what we have, and that really kind of started probably more. I think it's roughly about 2013, 2014. We moved into. No, actually, sorry. I think it's about 2012. In fact, we moved into filling a lot more first row sherry. But that PT level would have changed probably about the early 2000s into that kind of slightly smokier kind of core, well, standard kind of spirit.
Richard, that brings me to a question that I want to ask, which I think is worth talking about the parent company in a minute. But while we're on the 21, one of the things I think is worth pointing out throughout the range, the 10, the 15, and the 21, is the price points are relative to a lot of things going on in the market quite reasonable. And I know one of the views that the family and the company has had on this for a long time is recognizing that, demand in industries goes through cycles. And, going back to one of the core founding principles of Gordon MacPhail back in 1895 to sell a good quality product at a popular price, and that sort of ethos still carries through with Benromach today, because selling through, especially some of these older expressions, everything you have, it could get very tempting to raise your prices dramatically, but you haven't done that.
Yeah, so the opening statement for Gordon MacPhail from the 24th of May in 1895 talked about offering a superior product at a popular price. And that is something that has probably stayed with the business that entire time. When it comes to Benromach, it's all about pricing it where we feel it should be priced in the market. And we do try and keep consistency, not only just in every province of Canada, but globally as well. So you can buy the 10, the 15, and 21 pretty much the same price in any kind of market in the world. And that's just to try and make consumers not have to be penalized for where they're based. It's just more about trying to get that consistency coming through there. So we are trying to build a brand over the next kind of 10 years to get us up to where we can get to with our current production. And to do that, we need to make sure that we take everyone on the journey with us.
Mhm. Now, my other question, and this relates back to your comment about how 2012 you started filling more sherry for Benromach. Now, in the last few months, there was an announcement that Gordon MacPhail was going to stop filling casks from other distilleries. Part of it is a move more towards focusing on Benromach. Did that trend really start kind of a while ago, but now it's kind of been more formalized with the way things are in the market now?
So this is something that we've been preparing for since my grandfather's time. So we always knew that the rest to our business is Gordon MacPhail as an independent bottler. So we're a little bit different to other independent bottlers. We don't buy mature whiskey. We're filling our own casks that we source from Spain or the US with spirit from distilleries throughout Scotland. And we're blessed to have stocks from 100 different distilleries aging back to some of the oldest whiskies in the world. But we could always see that one day we might get a phone call from distilleries saying we can't fill any more spirit with them. And eventually that means our business would come to an end, because if we can't fill spirit, we can't make whiskey in the future. So this is just something that as a business, as a family, we started back in the 90s when we bought Benromach, to safeguard the future of our business, but also to kind of fulfill a family dream of not just maturing whiskey, but actually distilling it and maturing it ourselves. So it's just the natural evolution of our business as distilleries become more brand conscious, as it becomes harder to fill new make from different distilleries, just because of, not because of different relationships, it's just because the industry has evolved from where it was 100 years ago to where it is today. So that journey started, well, over 25 years ago, and it's something that's just continuing to this day. But that's why we've built a second distillery now. So as a business, we are now laying down more spirit than we ever have in our history. And that is all because we want to keep reinvesting, but at least now it's going to be laying down stock that we can, well, from our distilleries, that we can control and make sure we can still have it in 10, 15, 20 years time.
So Bill Somerville, who's on the chat tonight, commented, so how much stock is left in years? I think the joke there is, and a lot of us, there was some clickbait news stories about this online, about Gordon MacPhail to stop independent bottlings, is that you've got decades worth of stock of independent bottlings to go.
Yeah, so the youngest whiskey released under Gordon MacPhail right now, and that may change in the future, is 10 years old. So we can still make that for another 10 years because we fill new make, we have that in the warehouse already maturing. The oldest whiskey we do today is we've done so far has been an 80-year-old. So we've got cask laid down to be an 80-year-old in 80 years time. So there'll be no change to availability, particularly on single casks, for decades. Let's just say we changed our portfolio to be the youngest whiskey being 18 years old. No one would notice anything for 18 years, and then it'd just be 19 years old. I mean, it's a long time, but it is a journey. We could have just not told anyone about it and just left it for the next couple of decades, and no one would have been the wiser about it. But it's been a very significant year for the business. Opening the cairn a year ago, Benromach now reaching 25 years old. It's meant to be a very positive story about how our business is evolving moving forward, rather than being a negative that we're stopping something, because it's not going to affect. I'm looking on the screen, and without trying to offend anyone, it's not going to affect anyone on the screen. It's going to be potentially your kids or even your grandkids, if you have any, would be affected by this in the future.
Well, and I think one other thing, which probably you're too kind to say, but is worth pointing out, is, the market goes through cycles and there are changes. And there could be a time when companies are coming cap in hand again, hoping that someone will come and buy spirit. So I guess I'm kind of hoping that if that happens at some point down the line, that there's an openness to that possibly changing.
So you never know what the future holds. Right now, we've got certain rules in place about how much whiskey we need to fill for it to be not so much viable in the future, but to be interesting. If we only had a few makes under Gordon MacPhail, it wouldn't really tick the box as an independent bottler. And potentially that's where we would have got to in the future, is that we'd have been filling less and less makes. And that means the portfolio would be very, very different in 50 years time. So we're looking at what we want to leave behind as a business. Right now, we've got massive stocks of aged whiskies from 100 different distilleries, leaving the grandkids a lot of whiskey from 10 distilleries or 15 distilleries, whatever the number would have been. It's a very different proposition to having 100 different makes and offering that kind of really diverse and kind of depth of portfolio that we currently enjoy.
Very good. All right, let's move on to the Benromach 2002. This is the cask that's currently in market right now. Richard, I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to lie to you about this. I have been telling people that this is the closest thing they're going to get to trying 25-year-old Brora circa 12, 15 years ago, which is not something that you can get anymore. And I guess what I mean by that is you've got this lovely mix of delicate smoke, tropical fruit. There's a waxiness coming in there as well too. It's an absolutely just gorgeous whiskey, and it's not a one-off. It's building on a theme. I think people might see some parallels even when we compare with the 2003 that we're going to try next. But just blown away. And I know Kurt made the comment earlier about how he prefers bourbon casks. I have to admit, I'm somewhat on that page myself as well, because it just allows you to see how good the spirit coming out of Benromach is.
So in the future, only 1/3 of what we fill will be ex-bourbon. So these will still casks at this age will still be coming through, but we'll see a higher percentage of sherry single casks coming through at the same time. But offering single casks just gives a chance to try something a little bit different, because we don't have the core range is more of that sherry maturation. So it's great to get a chance to try something that is different to that kind of core style, but you still get that DNA, that little bit of smokiness is still there. But aged American oak, for me, it's always about that kind of tropical flavor profile. So to get more that kind of tangerine, bit of apricot coming through there, a little bit of pineapple, and just say, yeah, really nice balanced whiskey.
This is going way tropical, very waxy, elegant smoke on the palate. Before we bring up any other points, I'm going to maybe let Kurt chime in on this one. Kurt, what are your thoughts on the 2002?
When these samples arrived, it was like all of us in the room kind of looked at each other and went, holy cow. This one and one we're going to try 2 whiskeys from now arrived at the same time, and we had to have them both. I wanted one, Andrew wanted one. I think either one of us probably would have taken both. And I think it was that moment where I was like, it's done. These guys are officially my favorite distillery. They've dethroned Ardbeg and everybody that's active right now. There's nobody that touches what you guys are doing. It's absolutely next level. This cask was the softer of the two, the prettier of the two, I would say. I love, like what Andrew said, those orange tones, wax tones, a little bit of old oils, like really, really soft woods, leather, everything that I hunt for in old school style. This is beautiful, beautiful cask.
Evan, you want to chime in?
Yeah, I have to say this is part of the reason, beyond Richard being on it, this is part of the reason I was wanting to be in on this tasting today, because I honestly haven't revisited this whiskey too much since we tried the sample, and it's just got this crazy combination of like softness plus peat plus a bit of salt, and just shows so well for its age, and it's just a lovely dram.
James?
Yeah, Richard, I admit I did tell the guys the look on your face when we were in Scotland and I compared Benromach to Springbank, which of course is a kind of a chintzy sales technique that I sometimes use in the field to get new listings. But if you've had the fortune to taste those old Broras, the resemblance is striking. And to think that these things are going to be coming down the pipe for the next foreseeable future is just so exciting to me. Yeah.
So to give you an idea, when we made this back in 2002, we're only laying down 130,000 liters of alcohol per year. That's equivalent of roughly about, let's just say, 44,000 6-packs of whiskey at this age, well, at 10 years old. And that's not enough for what we currently need right now. So yeah, for us, it's more like we look back. I saw a question in the chat about how many casks do we have. So as a business, we currently have about 45,000 casks, half of G&M, half of Benromach, give or take a few thousand either way. And if you look at where we'll be at the end of this decade, we'll have 100,000 casks laid down as a business. So our transition from independent bottler to distillery owner means we'll have a lot more liquid in the future, and there'll be a lot more aged Benromach coming through that pipeline as well.
So two things come up from this, Richard, one of which is something I've wanted to ask, and I think it's something that's been glossed over a little bit, is just touching quickly on fermentation and distillation at Benromach, because I think that is, I mean, we can talk about your wood policy, and I've said this in many tastings before. Gordon MacPhail Benromach's wood policy is second to none. I don't care what any marketers will tell you, they're second to none. But things start before that, and I think that the fermentation and distillation also play an important role there. And you do have a little bit of an old school approach to both.
Yeah, absolutely. So all the equipment we use is kind of more traditional. So we have wooden wash backs. We have for fermentation, we use two types of yeast. Probably one of the only, if not the only distillery still to use brewers and distillers yeast in our fermentation. We feel like it gives it a kind of fruitier character. We don't work weekends, so we have to go on average fermentation length, which is 90 hours. So we've got some 3-day fermentation, which is some 5-day fermentation. So the average out about 90 hours. We've got two stills, but they're very small. So our wash still can take about 7,500 liters. Our spirit still is about 3,500, and we can only make 1,000 liters of kind of new make from each batch that we do. So right now we have to distill 24/7, 5 days a week to get to that 500,000 kind of liters of alcohol per year. So for us, yeah, it's all about quality, not quantity. But yeah, so going back to our distillation, it is one batch. If we start at the very beginning, everything we use is Scottish barley, and that's sourced through 3 different local kind of maltsters. We will use 1.75 tons of barley in each batch. It'll go through our semi-lauter. So a semi-lauter wash mash tun only spins one way, doesn't have the forks that go over itself. It's too small. If you come and see our new distillery, it's 5.8 tons per batch. So very, very different. So Benromach is very, very small in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
We'll then add our 2 types of yeast for an average of 90 hours to create our kind of, try and get that kind of fruitier character coming through there. One thing about the distillery is the water that we use is the same water source that we've used since the 1898. And that's actually where the name of the distillery comes from. So most distilleries used to be bens or glens, so hills or valleys. So Benromach is because the name comes from our water source, the Chatfield Spring, coming from the foot of the Romach Hills, and that's where that name comes from. So yeah, so our stills themselves are designed by Forsyth and Rothes, who do a lot of the distilleries in Scotland and all around the world, and they're very small stills in height. We're trying to create that kind of that medium to heavy bodied style, because if you have really tall stills, like Glenmorangie always comes to mind, you get a much lighter spirit. So we're trying to create that kind of heavier kind of distillate that we can use for those kind of heavier sherry casks, but also for longer term maturation as well.
So now I don't know if you caught it, but James Bourne asked a question partly for himself, but partly probably also from ourselves as well too. Since there's a tipping point where you started filling more sherry than bourbon, is there a point in the foreseeable future where we might start seeing some single sherry casks of Benromach? Yeah,
so we do a couple a year in my region at the moment, all from like 2012 and onwards, but that will just grow in number as we get more into that stock in the future.
Cool. All right, let's move on to the 2003. Now this is a cask from a couple of years ago, so I've had to go into our archive. You won't find this on our website. It is the only whiskey in tonight's tasting that is not available. But I will share it here. So this is a first fill ex-bourbon barrel from 2003, bottled after 18 years, 57.2%. Now, interestingly, with both this one as well as our 2002 cask that you just sampled, I want to say like a low outturn, but 168 total bottles. You are seeing a little bit of oxidation here, and I think maybe that might be part of the magic and why both these whiskeys are straying into that tropical realm. Now, Richard, I have to imagine this is probably one you don't have kicking around with you tonight.
No, it's not. I had the 2002, but not this one.
All right. Well,
I would pretend. The great thing about virtual tasting is you'd never know. I could have just made that up and said this is a year.
well, the only reason I bring it up is I can remedy that in the future and maybe bring one over with me. But why don't I start with Kurt on this one here? This was from a couple years back, and I think this is when we started to get the sense, we'd obviously had the 10s, the 15s from Benromach, but we started to get the sense of what the spirit was doing for longer term maturation, even before that 2002.
I went back, Andrew, because I just presented Benromach to the club just days ago. I went through a bunch of these whiskeys, and I went back through our website, and I went back through my old site and everything. Do you remember those two casks you did at Benromach long before I worked there? There was no 4 and no 5, an 8 and a 9-year-old.
I do, yeah.
I read through my tasting notes, and then I read through notes I wrote of a 10-year-old years ago, but from the new-ish distillation. And you can see that the DNA is present for all of it. It's so cool to watch. I think we've seen that the spirit is gorgeous young, and it's absolutely stunning when it gets older. But I think you're right. I think this 18-year-old kind of wowed us a couple of years ago. And when the samples for one we've got in store now came, I knew there was no backing down. I knew you were going to be like, oh man, we did 18, we got to do 20 now. So I'm kind of hoping this trend sort of continues, putting the bug in the ears of both Richard and James before I turn the mic over to Harmony or Evan or whoever.
Thanks, Kurt. Evan, you want to chime in? Harmony's got dog issues, so we may not see her again. We'll see.
Yeah, this one, I still think I like this one a little bit more than the 2002, personally. It's got this creaminess to it and this slight oiliness that I just love. The peats sort of step down and the barley comes through a bit more for me, but there's nothing wrong with either one, but I do miss having this one, and I really wish I had purchased one when we had it around.
It's good, Evan, but it's not as Brora-esque as the 2002. I don't know what it is. There's something a little different about it. It's got that waxiness creeping in. I think I know what you mean. Like, it's sweeter. There's more honey tones. There's more like bright fruits, but I think the 2002 is just all about subtleties to me. James.
I remember you talking about the fact that it kind of seemed like it had a smoke profile that didn't really fit a lot of the other Benromachs, and I totally picked that up today.
Yeah.
This is kind of a question for Richard. Some of the other, obviously you do distill some heavily peated spirit. Is some of that like kept back? And is that something that also could potentially end up as like a single cask offering in the future?
Yeah, there could be some heavily peated single casks coming out at some point. Probably
You just dropped an entire bomb on Alberta by saying that, Richard.
We do have some, yeah, we are making heavy peated spirit. There's no reason why we couldn't offer one up in the future. Just need to leave that one with me.
Yeah.
We're doing a heavy peated sherry and heavy peated ex-bourbon casks, well, batch releases now, so. But going back to the differences in between the 2002 2003, that's the great thing about single casks. Every cask is different. They may be similar in flavor profile, but there'll always be some differences coming through there. And that's why if there's only 190 bottles, 150 bottles, or 164 in this one, I think if I remember correctly, once they're gone, they're gone. There'll never ever be another cask exactly like this. But with our new distillery, the Cairn, we're not just doing first fill casks. Because what we do see with Benromach is we have first fill bourbon, we have first fill sherry hogsheads, and we have first fill sherry butts. Everything's first fill. So for us, we get a lot of consistency coming through that way, but potentially to offer a bit more diversity in some casks in the future. But with the new distillery, we've got the ability now of using refill casks there as well.
Very cool. James, I think I know where you were going with your question, but you were a little delicate with it, which is that, like, what are the chances, Richard, that just inadvertently the 2003 was more heavily peated than the standard Benromach? Because I think
No, standard.
You doubt it?
Yeah, it'd have been standard. We wouldn't have released.
Just down to chance that the peat came through more.
Yeah,
it's cool. Very, very good. All right, let's move on to the 2007 cast now. Kurt, I'll let you start out. Now, Richard, do you have this one with you or not?
Yeah, I got 2007 one. Little sample.
All right, so we'll start with Richard. But this is a cast bottled for Kurt Robinson's club, the SinDicate. I'll put it up on screen here, but yeah, Richard, if you want, feel free to fire away on that one.
So another ex-bourbon cask. So it's going to be, this one for me will be less tropical, much more about that kind of citrus, vanilla, and apple you get coming through there. But one thing I would say about the strength is it's still 57% alcohol, whereas other ones were still quite high 50s as well. So every year we lose strength to the Angels, well, strength and volume to the Angels. If Keith Cruikshank, who's our distillery manager, who signs, whose name's on every bottle we release now, we always talk about how happy the Angels are in Scotland, but they're very gentle with us. We still retain a lot of strength in our bottlings. Yeah, so for me, apples, bit of charred oak, a little bit of smokiness, and maybe a little bit of orange coming through there as well. That would be my 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning tasting note anyway, for whiskey I've never tried before.
And there's an interesting mintiness to it. And the cool thing is I got that minty note has come out in the 15 and the 21 as well as in this 2007. So kind of interesting to see those come across. I know somebody else mentioned mint or spearmint notes earlier on in here. Kurt, do you want to chime in on the cask?
It seems like the proud parent puffing up their kid, while we actually did nothing for this one aside from get offered wicked cask samples. Obviously, I love this one. We got this in the 2002 into the shop at the same time. I'd spoken to James saying, I really, really want one. Andrew, I think, had already had samples on the way, and James said, well, I'll take a peek at these two. Fortunately, like I said, Andrew wanted to up the ante from the 18 and made it a lot more affordable for us too, which is great. But there's something about the younger one, the 07, that I fell really, really hard for. And it kind of made me think, and I hate to keep drawing this analogy, but you remember those rare malts, the young growers, like the 21, 22-year-olds that were way more aggressive, way more punchy. This one's a little bit in those veins without having the same full-on Brora character, but it's just punchier, it's a little bit more aggressive, it's a little more vibrant. I think I ultimately want to drink more of the older one, the 2002, but this one is, with the price point being what it is, this is an absolute cracker that I wish I could take multiple casks of this one.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as
James,
sorry, Richard?
I can probably help you out there, Kurt.
As James can probably attest, with one single exception, there have been few casks from either Benromach or Gordon MacPhail that we haven't been like completely enamored with. And I mean, that's not normal. Normally we're looking at a number of things and unfortunately some things we just don't work for us, but especially with Benromach, I can't think of anything that's been put in front of us that we weren't impressed with or happy with. James, did you want to chime in on this one?
Yeah, not a ton to say about this. I love how this whiskey has like a certain authority to it on the palate. Admittedly, Kurt's going to be sad that I did this, but I did add some water to it this time around because I didn't get to try with water the first time. And yeah, it does bring the fruit out a little bit more, but it's still like just a beast on the palate, just like absolutely grips your palate. Just lots of texture. Yeah, so there's a lot to love here. It's not subtle though.
No. But I mean, I think to Kurt's point, like going back to the, and if you're reading between the lines here, Kurt and I are sort of comparing bourbon cask matured Benromach to Brora. It is sort of like more of those like 62% alcohol plus 18-year-old Broras that were in the rare malt series, like those really high ABV ones. So there's an interesting parallel there. I think it's shown well. Evan?
Yeah, I think authority is a good word. I agree with you there, James, where this one just like, this is the one that doesn't just walk in the room, it slams the door open on the way. And compared to the other ones where that are a little bit more like soft spoken and elegant and refined. But I like how this one has this sort of combination of sweet chocolate and into graham cracker. Like it's almost like a s'more that you're making around the fire pit with the smokiness of the background there. It's a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm. Cool. All right, we've got one more to go in here. Norm, I'm putting the links. I know you were asking how old. I believe, is it 15, 16 years, but I just put the link to the bottle on our site into the chat for you. All right, we've got one more to go. Now, this one came to light from us because Richard, you were traveling in Ontario at the time, and a club in Kingston started emailing me about this. Now, were you with Bill Somerville at that time, or is that just coincidence?
I had lunch with Bill that day, and then Bill decided that he had bigger and better things to go and do that evening than to come to a tasting with myself. So he left me to go and hang out with the guys from Kingston, and we tried this whiskey here, our Polish Oak.
Mm.
I'm a bit worried about Bill's safety though. He seems like he's hanging on the side of a wall at the moment.
Well, I was gonna say, like, we could let Bill say hello for a minute, but he is sideways, so, or not. I mean, if he has been given the permission to unmute himself, but I mean, oh, hey,
I was
Bill.
hosting a Robert Burns night. I had over 200 people waiting for me. It wasn't my fault that Richard conflicted with that.
Okay.
I see. Rumor has it you've moved to Saskatchewan. Oh, he's muted again. Hold on, Bill. Try to. There you
Yeah, I
go.
was in Swift Current. I was in a Swift Current in a bar in Swift Current, and I convinced the bar people there, for some unknown reason, this one bar that we visited for a year, they started doing a lot of 15-year-old Benromach, and they were doing a case a month. I don't know what their sales are now that I've left, but I'm back in Kingston.
Interesting. Well, I'm sure you've earned a dram or two there, Bill. Richard, tell us about this Polish Oak cask.
Yeah, so I might just answer a question I can see there about the bourbon kind of 10, 15, and 20. One of us can link into this one in some ways. So we could do a 10, 15, or 20, well, 10 or 15 ex bourbon at 40% as a market exclusive. We just need to sell that to James as an idea and get him to be okay with that. But we do that in some markets where we do basically a different style at 46% as a market exclusive. But occasionally, when we have something, now linking back into this whiskey, occasionally we have some whiskey that doesn't fit into the portfolio as a release, and we've got something a bit different here. So this is a single cask that we did, but because it's not in the core style, we call this a single cask Polish Oak single cask edition. So we did about 5 casks for the world. This is the North American one. So 2/3 went to the US, 1/3 went to Canada. A lot of it went to Kingston. Obviously through the correct channels. And this is, 11 years old, 10 years old, cask number 768, 262 bottles, but not matured in a sherry cask because it wasn't seasoned with sherry in the Sherry Triangle in Spain. It was seasoned with sherry in Scotland, and the cask was made from Polish oak rather than just being European oak. And the reason for that is that, well, my grandfather always felt that Polish oak gave a really nice kind of sweetness to maturation. So occasionally, being this kind of small distillery, we can do experiments where we try different types of not only casks, but different type of oak as well and see what we get.
Mm-hmm. So this is Polish Oak seasoned with sherry in Scotland.
Yeah.
That's a bit unusual.
So we can't call it a sherry cask, so it's not a sherry cask. But the flavor profile will be similar to that of a sherry cask. And that Polish Oak is something that's a little bit different. I mean, everyone's gonna have a view if the Polish Oak makes a difference or not. Our view is it adds a little bit more kind of sweetness to the whiskey, but that's just what we think.
Well, it's quite bright and tangy, and I don't know if that's partly because of its youth or the oak or the seasoning, but interesting. James, maybe I'll let you go first this time if you want to chime in on this one.
Yeah, I did have one question, Richard. So that was my question actually as well, was this virgin oak, or, you know, how did you kind of take the edge off of it? But how long was the sherry in there for?
I'd have to go double check. I don't have that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I love this. My general impression is that, you know, you do get a little bit of a more raw wood character to it than you would, for instance, in the organic. But you know, there's a fruit to it that kind of buffers that, and it's in balance. I love it.
Yeah, so our normal kind of seasoning for sherry hogsheads would be about 2 years. But I can double check and get back to you. They do exact length, but it's it would be a season for a reasonable amount of time.
So Richard, what I'm hearing from you is you're not willing to wake your brother up at 3:16 in the morning to answer a question for a whiskey tasting.
Absolutely, that is correct.
That's fair.
I want him to still be nice to me and help me access some casks for the Canadian market. So I've got your best interest.
Totally fair. Totally fair. All right, Evan.
Yeah, the tanginess that you mentioned, like that's all over the place for me on the nose. And I was saying in the chat, it reminds me of it's almost like a cross between apple cider vinegar and balsamic vinegar, where it's got that sharpness, but the big fruit notes at the same time. And then it's just so nicely rich and round on the palate, and almost has a bit of syrupiness without like going too far into it and becoming unbalanced at the same time. What a crazy cool dram. More people should be putting sherry and Polish oak before putting whiskey in it. I think that's what it comes down to.
Evan, like you do a lot of the society tastings for the shop. I think if I was writing tasting notes for the panel, I'd be like suggesting that this is a single malt for young gentlemen. Like that this is kind of a rough, raw, in your face version of Benromach. You know, it's not for middle-aged gentlemen. This is a little, it's got some edges to it. I like it, but I don't know that this is my style of whiskey. Maybe I'm showing my age.
Is that like the West Side Story version of what a young gentleman is, or what?
Yeah, for sure. Like a rogue, a little young brute.
That's the great thing about Scotch whiskey, though, that everyone likes different things. And if we all like the same thing, it'd be a very boring tasting, because we don't.
Absolutely. And I'm not saying I don't like it. I'm just saying I don't think I could, unlike well, frankly, everything else we've had tonight, like this just isn't my style. Anyway, Kurt. Oh, are you?
It's still great. It's minty. I like Evan's notes on the cider vinegar and the balsamic. Really, really cool notes there. Kind of nail it. And big spice. I would happily drink this, but I do think it's top heavy in favor of wood over the spirit. And I think Andrew, if I'm reading between the lines too, for you, you're kind of like me. You're seeing that the distillate coming out of there is the heart of it. Like that's where it really shines, whether it's ex-bourbon or whatever it is. And too much cask is kind of hiding out on this one a little bit.
Yeah.
I prefer the more naked style.
Well, I'm spoiled, Kurt. I mean, like you, I've had a couple of decades of getting to try crazy, old, mature stuff, and I like what I like. I'm turning into my father prematurely, I think, is what's happening here.
So can I share? I chatted with Richard about this a little bit. I think it was in Victoria. I said many years ago, you and Michael came out and you did a tasting for the club for us. We got to drink all these gorgeous old Benromachs going back to, I think we went to 1969.
Oh.
And we stood up and introduced it and said, okay, so, you know, Richard's stepping into a lot of stuff and I'm going to step back and everything. So I'm going to have him, you know, do a bunch of this tasting. So Michael stood up and basically told the entire Benromach story and then left Richard with 8 whiskeys to talk about with nothing left to say. It was like a hang him out to dry thing, but one of the best experience I've ever had in tasting.
I still have nightmares about that experience, so thanks for bringing it up, Kurt. We had a plan of talking about who do what whiskey, who talk about which part of the family, because it's the same family history. But Michael, obviously, very experienced, great person, so knowledgeable. to the entire family and Benromach story and left me with the whiskey. And then I had to try and talk about the taste. This goes back about over 10 years ago now. So it was quite, yeah, still remember that.
Traumatizing.
But
All
it
right.
happened in Vegas as well, though, with Derek Hancock. I'm not sure if you ever met Derek in your time. So Derek was our export manager, associate director for export for many, many years. Stood up and did a tasting in Vegas. I made the same idea that I would do the family thing, and Derek would do the kind of distillery heritage thing for Benromach. And then I just remember he did both, and then left me to follow up and go, well, what do I say now? Because on the spot, try and make up some, well, not make up some stuff, find some new content to come out with.
Yeah. Well, teaches you to think on your feet, I suppose. Well, very we've all been there. Let's go through. We do what we call the speed round now. Want to see how things have changed and evolved in the glass. We'll try to move on from Richard's trauma. So starting with the triple distilled. Someone put avocado with red onion. That's Evan. Kurt, Evan, James, Richard. This is a bit of a free-for-all. We try to go really quick, but Kurt, you're unmuted. If you want to say something, go ahead.
Pretty soft and creamy, kind of like we expected there when we first came across it tonight. Really, really pretty. I don't remember this one being as nice as it is.
Yeah. And
Vanilla ice cream for me.
Yeah.
ice cream? Yeah.
Ice cream.
The peat's faded a lot throughout the course of the tasting. It's still there, but it's faded. Evan?
Yeah, still lovely stuff. I still get the peat, but it's coming off as has some nice starchy notes coming from the barley and malt there too.
Cool. James?
Yeah, the longer it sits, the more I get almost like that sherbety kind of orange ice cream character that reminds me a little bit of Linkwood, but with a bit of peat to it. It's fun.
Mm-hmm. Cool. All right. Maybe I'll start with James. Benromach 10.
Yeah, the longer this sits in the glass, I feel like the fruitier it gets, and it kind of like settles down and just kind of, has an ease to it. This seemed quite bold at the start of the tasting, and now it's just like, it's kind of chill.
Yeah. James, I got a task for you. Get this on WestJet. If this could be the WestJet pour for transatlantic flights, I'd be very happy.
Yeah.
So on that note, Benromach 21 is available on Cathay Pacific now as their kind of whiskey.
I don't think we get Cathay Pacific in Calgary. They probably do in Vancouver,
Yeah.
but still.
So we
Richard,
are trying. Yeah.
what's that?
We are trying. So yeah, who
Trying.
knows? Yeah.
Benromach 21 of Cathay Pacific. That's impressive. Evan, Benromach 10.
Yeah, it holds up really nicely. Still a great dram. More cherry notes coming through for me, along with what James said about the fruit.
Cool. Kurt?
Mine's getting a little soft in the glass. The triple distilled held up a little bit stronger, probably just because of the ABV, but it's still my favorite 10 in the world.
Yeah. The dead horse and all, but still, 46. But Kurt, I'm going to stick with you and go to the 15 right away.
It's like walking past somewhere that's kind of almost burning a toffee or a caramel or something like that. It's got a little bit of a smokiness and a toasty note and a lot of like heavy notes that lean into umami, almost savory for me.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Richard, why not?
Licorice. I've got licorice in my glass on this one.
Yeah, very good. James?
Yeah, that kind of like, caramel candy, toffee candy, like those craft toffees, given the time of year close to Halloween.
I mean, like a souvenir shop in like a tourist trap. Yeah. Evan?
Yeah, seconded on the licorice. It's going into like licorice, black licorice, and even into Dutch licorice notes with the saltiness there on the nose and palate.
Definitely getting a little bit Dutch there. All right, Evan, sticking with you on the 21, when you're on the spot.
Barley still sings on this one, like the fruit and the tropical notes come through. Little less peat, but it's there. Yeah, just a really nicely put together 21.
Yeah, it is. It's a tiny bit dilly too.
Mm-hmm.
which is cool. James.
It's a little bit funkier and kind of has some of those lactic notes more than showed at the beginning. That'd probably be my note of how it changed.
Yeah, I think that's where maybe my dill notes come in. Like it's just getting super dilly for me on the palate. Kurt?
Great notes for me. The palate is just a little heavy on the kind of winey notes, obviously like a damper kind of sherry style on the back end of it for me. Good whiskey though. And typically this is one of my favorite of the range, but this particular batch is just not my favorite to me.
Tough customer. Richard.
I gave it that kind of furniture polish.
Mhm.
I did that before, but
All right. I'm on to the Brora, aka Benromach 2002. Richard, you've got that in front of you. I know you don't have the 03, but what are your thoughts on this one now? Mine's gone. So, but I think I've got another one around here somewhere. I hope I've got another one here somewhere.
it's got this kind of really kind of resinous kind of nose to it now. It's not honey, but it's kind of sweeter. Yeah, I need to kind of put a word to it this time in the morning.
Well,
But-
that's fair. I mean, to me, it's somehow infusing wax and elegant smoke into tropical fruit. I don't know how you do it, but it's magic.
It's that kind of sweet polish. Yeah, and waxiness there.
Kurt.
That word Richard was looking for is more. This cask is incredible. I'm just grateful we got it. I adore this whiskey. Absolutely adore it. I think the DNA of the distillery to me screams like soft, warm weather, orange, peach, soft, clean smoke, kind of farmyard, slightly barnyardy kind of thing. And this is like the perfect example of how it's leaning into tropicals as it ages. I can't wait to see this stuff at 25, 30 years old. I'm a fan of Benromach in general, but the old stuff is not even close to as good as what's being produced now. And you cannot say that in the whiskey world anymore. So that's really, really cool.
Well, that's saying a lot because I remember those 21s and 25s when they came out, especially, and they were lovely whiskeys. Like they're absolutely beautiful. But I got to agree with Kurt. I think what you guys have done it right, and it's really showing in the spirit, and it's continuing to show over time. So throughout the range, the young stuff up to the older stuff. Evan, 2002.
I like this even more the second time around. Like I really enjoyed it. I don't have the same reference point for Brora that you and Kurt do, and maybe James, but it's a damn good dram. It's just the peat and the barley and the fruit being so much in balance is just incredible.
Yeah. All right. Evan, back to you on the 2003. While you're getting ready to talk, I still can't believe how smoky this is compared to the 2002 on the palate. It's like smoked caramels. It's very fruity. It's got more decadence to it, a little bit less fruit, but the peat on this one really, really survived.
Yeah, I agree, especially versus the 2003, where it's got more golden apples and even into linseed oil right on the nose for me right now. Yeah, I still love the creaminess on the palate on this one.
And you give 2 thumbs up to Burlesque whiskey.
Whenever possible, yeah.
Kurt.
Yeah, just a little more waxy, a little more minerally. It's got a little bit more of a herbaceous kind of organic kind of feel to me. Slightly more aggressive in all the right ways. I do prefer the elegance of the previous one though, but I'm happy to think of both.
They're both beautiful. Richard, do you want to pretend or should we move on to the 2007?
I won in 2007, so yeah.
All right, why don't you lead us off on the 2007?
For me, it's poached pear. That pear note is just getting stronger and stronger on it.
Yeah, that's a good. Well, Now, Richard, I have to imagine you've been into like a fancy German restaurant. Maybe it's a Michelin star, maybe not, but where they do those little reductions and you've got, I don't know if it's pear or some other kind of fruit that they reduce into like a paste. This reminds me of some horrifically expensive meal I didn't pay for in Germany one time.
We talked about you running out on the bills before, Andrew. Yes.
So remember in Elgin, we're quite limited. There's only a few. Well, there's actually one restaurant you can go there now to up in Avalar that you might be able to get that kind of poached bear, that kind of reduction there.
Well, Stephen and I went to one that was quite nice in Elgin.
Yeah.
So it's a
That was
nice,
fun. Yeah.
Elgin's a nice town, and there's some good dining options. You don't need to get too fancy. There's classics. The peat on this holding up quite nicely. Kurt, this is your cask. It's that younger, a little bit more grippy style, but lots of layers, nice balance to it.
This one, it just makes me happy. We bottled a few cool casks for the club, and this one just kind of makes my heart sing a little bit. So very, very happy with this one. And like I said, with the last one, super grateful we got these two to come across our way. So James, Richard, thank you.
Indeed. Evan.
Yeah, it's just it has these nice apple notes and the pear notes that you guys mentioned, but it's right now my glass is just about empty because I enjoyed it so much, but it's got that just red embers left in the fire pit after the fire is just about gone out nose to it, which I just love.
Well, James, you're back. We're on the 2007. If you have anything else you want to add to it, you're muted. Oh, he's talking to somebody. Never mind. Sorry. Polish Oak. Evan, back to you again.
It still has that great sort of a balsamic meets apple cider vinegar note to me in a really cool way. That tanginess is just so enticing on the nose. Little bit of maplewood bacon or applewood smoked bacon in there as well. But yeah, cool dram. I love the sort of the clash between the sweet and the peat on this one. And it seems to be it was more of a friendly battle than like just a full-on blood and gore punch 'em up.
This is the sort of dram that if you were drinking sideways with Bill Somerville, you'd want to have, I suspect. James, we missed you on the last one.
Yeah, so I admit we just had a full-on almost house fire scenario. There was open flames and the carpet on my son's bedroom floor. He was experimenting with some electronics. So I now know a new tasting note for smoke notes that does not appear in the whiskeys tonight, thankfully.
That's both bad and good, I guess.
So yeah, I'm sure somewhere in the recording, if you have your volume loud, you hear my son yelling "fire, fire" in the background there.
Hey, well, he did the right thing. That's something to be happy about.
Exactly.
Anyway.
James, just quickly, how old is your son? And just so I can sort of gauge how far I have to go until I have the same scenario.
2012.
No, it's not too far away then.
Well, this won't put your minds at ease, but around the age of 12, I realized that model rocket kits catch on fire. So if they're going to catch on fire, you might as well make them catch on fire on purpose. I'm just saying, don't buy your son's model rocket kits. Trust me on this one.
Yeah. Kids these days want drones, not model rocket kits.
That's probably worse. James, Polish Oak, any comments before we move on?
Yeah, the longer it sits and some of the wood notes settle down, I think it gets more and more integrated.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I love it. It's a different take on Benromach. Like I don't think I've ever had another Benromach quite like this one.
No.
But it's great. But the spirit can hold up to it. Like that's the thing, right? It doesn't get smothered.
Yeah, Kurt.
I was almost a little indifferent to this one in the beginning, but it's softened beautifully in the glass. There's almost like a little bit of creme caramel or like a dulce de leche kind of top note. Still everything we talked about before, still that kind of booziness and still, big spices and fermenty kind of apple tones. but it's kind of mellowed, really, really pretty.
Yeah, it's grown on me. I still think it's a younger man's whiskey, maybe like an Evan and a Richard Dram more than a Curtin and an Andrew Dram. Just saying, vintages.
Boy, that generation gap of 2 years, it's
Such
a
a big,
deeper
such a
and
big
longer
generation
crevice
gap.
than we thought.
Yeah, there's a maturity with time.
I think it's 3 years for me. So I mean that actually does add that more youthful kind of nose.
That's right. All right, I'm going to trigger the poll now. Partly, if for no other reason than because we got to let Richard go to bed, or go back to bed soon. The whiskeys are slightly out of order, but whatever. You should be able to figure them out. You get to vote for your first favorite and your second favorite, and I don't know if there's a surprise. Oh, there isn't tonight. Evan, I do have to say we really enjoyed your surprise third question. I think it was with the Pulteney tasting the other night. It caught us off guard, but we were amused by it. So well done. I mean, for future reference, maybe ask a question like, should Richard be wearing a checked shirt? Or something like that.
Yeah, some things are just a given though. Like,
We wore a plain one tonight, though.
I know it's like you stole this shirt.
I think I left my Chinese shirt in Canada last time I was there, and I'm guessing you found it.
Well, as long as you left it with Evan, maybe you'll get it back. We'll see. All right. While the votes are coming in, I'm going to start with James. James, if you had to pick two favorites tonight, what would be your two favorites in the lineup?
Yeah, I mean, the 2002 does steal the show a little bit, but actually, I'm going to say my top favorite is what has been just my go-to daily dram over the last like 2.5 years, and that's the Benromach 21-year-old. And then I'm going to give you second place with the 2002 single cask.
I'll take it. I'll take it.
Yeah.
Evan, top two.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to love in this lineup. It was really cool to revisit the triple distilled and see that it's still showing really, really well. I think I do agree with you that there's a bit more peat to it, but I'm going to pick the 15-year-old for a regularly available dram. It's definitely more robust than I recall, and that's cool to see. It's showing really, really well. And then even though you can't buy it anymore, I just have a soft spot for that 2003 KWM cask.
Okay, Evan, always the outlier. We appreciate it. Kurt, top two.
I wish I could be vain enough to pick the one that's got the club name on it, but the 2002 is just so much everything I want. So that's got to be my number one. And then the Sin Cask is probably number two.
Okay, very good. Richard, I know you don't have all seven, but you've got most of them. And I know this is awkward for you, but if you had to pick your two favorites, what would they be?
I mean, it's like picking my favorite child. I mean, it's really hard to do that. But
No, everyone has their favorite child. No one wants to admit it, but there's a favorite child.
Yeah, it's the one that doesn't light carpets on fire.
okay. So I'm going to do three just because I'm going to go a little bit. Ben 15 is always on my list, but that's an easy one to answer. And I go for triple distilled and the 2002 would be my kind of 2-1. But then Polish Oak I really like as well, but that's because I'm younger. So that's
Richard, because you let us off there, I'm going to pick 3 too. 2002, triple distilled, 2003 are my three favorites. Bang for buck, that triple distilled is incredible. The 10-year-old as well too, I think punches well above its place. All right, on to results. I'm going to share them real quick, and then we're going to cut Richard loose so he can go back to sleep. Round one, an interesting back and forth between the 2002 and 2003 for first and second. And coming in third, it looks like the 15-year-old Benromach. So there you go. That's very cool for round one. For round two, we've got a much more even playing field. The 2007 showing strong, along with the 2011 Polish Oak, the 2002, and the 15-year. And the 21-year honorable mention. So I think one of the cool things about that is, and this goes back to sort of talking about Benromach before, is just the strength throughout the range, the young ones as well as the mature ones are all showing really well. And this is not something I think that's new. We've seen this for a long time, and it's just really cool to see the brand coming up. Now, Richard, if I was going to ask one last question before we wrap tonight, this is the 25th anniversary of the revival of Benromach. You're not releasing a 25-year-old, but do you have something special planned to market?
There'll be nothing released as a commemorative bottling this year that I'm aware of. So we will have some casks potentially coming out, which might fill that bill. So it's a bit of a big answer, but there's nothing.
That's fair.
25 is a very young birthday for us. We're used to like the 100th or the 125th or.
Yeah, it's just 20. It's only 25. I mean, it's not worth celebrating yet. Maybe 30, maybe 40.
Yeah.
Maybe at that point there'll be a big celebration. That being said, for those of you who have a chance, if you're ever over, the Benromach Distillery does wonderful tours, tastings. You have a gin experience as well there too that people can go and see.
Yeah, so Benromach's all about the personal touch. So again, the distillery is not about technology. So just a quick recap would be, is it old school Speyside, the way Speyside used to be made. So the tour is very authentic that way as well. You get to see our dunnage warehouses. So we use old school warehouses there as well. So not big racked warehouses for Benromach. So it's all stored wooden rails. So you can come and see that as an experience. If you're overseeing Benromach, you should come and see the Cairn, our brand new distillery. So Benromach's all about the way whiskey was made and about that old school traditional approach. The new distillery is all about technology and being as efficient as possible. And plus the location of the new distillery is right in the River Spey. You end up in this tasting room overlooking the Spey and the Cairngorm Mountains, and definitely worth a visit. If you're up there as well, you should come and see the Gumberfield shop. We're currently in a temporary home because we're refurbishing our original shop from 1895, which will be opening in 2024. But we still have our shop a short walk away from the original kind of premises that you can come and see as well to learn a bit more about the kind of the history of single malts and what we've done under the Gumberfield portfolio for the last 128 years.
Well, and if I were to say one last thing about the Cairn is Gordon MacPhail, beautiful distillery, beautiful spot, but you did something that I think for almost any other whiskey company would be sacrilegious. You created blended malts at our 55 and 70 years of age. No one else could do this. No one else would do this, that people can go and sample at the distillery.
So for us, we did a range called CRN 57. So the distillery is called the Cairn. The Cairn is a nice kind of symbolic name. It's that kind of pile of stones you get on the top of a hill in Scotland and all around the world. They also mark a direction of travel as well. So they're a marker. So it's kind of our generation's stone that we're adding back into the business. So the Cairns were quite symbolic, and it's in the Cairngorm National Park as well. But when we've got a long time to wait until we get to what we plan to be our first release as a 12-year-old. So another 11 years to go. So we've come out with a range called CRN 57, with 57 being the latitude of the distillery. And we do a 12, 18, 25, 30-year-old, a 57-year-old, and a 70-year-old, all as blended malts. The reason we do blended malts is it's all about the flavor, being in the style of whiskey that we are making, rather than being about one distillery that we're using to bottle in the short term as well. So yeah, so we decided that we wanted to show what we expect the whiskey to taste like in 70 years' time. And thanks to our Gordon MacPhail portfolio, we were able to pull together some blended malts. Again, all done through our whiskey supply team, with my brother, making sure that using the style, looking at what we are making, and then trying to create our. But the 7-chilled one always makes me smile because someone comes to try it this year. How many people come back in 70 years' time to say, "Hey guys, I think you got that wrong"? So I think we're quite safe in that one. That it could be a bit of creep, a bit of variance might come in that one over time, but we'll see what happens in 70 years. I know I won't be there to see it, unfortunately, but hopefully I'll get to see the 30-year-old at least.
You'll be there for at least the 40, maybe the 50. You never know. You might be there for the 70, Richard. Who knows?
Yeah.
Well, listen, big thank you for getting up early to do this tasting with us tonight. James, thank you as always. Kurt, Evan, Harmony, I know she dropped from the call too. Thank you. Richard, in all seriousness, we love what Gordon MacPhail and the Urquhart family have done with Benromach. I think some other companies could definitely take a page from this. You guys are top of the class for sure, and absolutely love the whiskeys you're putting out.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you to you and your team. It's always a privilege to come and get a chance to talk about our company and our whiskies. So thank you for the opportunity. James, again, thanks for all the work you're doing for us in Canada. We've got a bit of a joke going that James is the greatest cask salesman in the world, because Canada is definitely overachieving in terms of cask sales market. So thanks to everyone on the screen for that. And so I guess thanks everyone for taking time to come and listen to some stories and try our whiskies. And yeah, so thanks to you all. So Slange, good night.
Thanks, everybody. Hey, and on that note, if you're interested in a Polish Oak, send me an email, scotchguy@kensingtonwinemarket.com. We'll put you on the, if there's more than 6 requests, we'll do a draw. But thank you for that. James, once again, thank you. Kurt, Evan, Harmony, and Richard. Have a great night, everyone. We'll talk soon, and take care. Cheers.
Cheers.